Welcome to History Respawned. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. Today's show considers Ubisoft's recent World War I game, Valiant Hearts. Today's episode is a solo effort, and is presented as a review of the game based on its historical content. Valiant Hearts is a puzzle-adventure game set during the First World War. The game follows the lives of four characters during the conflict. Karl is a German national living in France with his wife and child, and he is deported by the French government at the beginning of the war and later joins the German army. Emile is Karl's father-in-law, and is drafted into the French army after Karl is deported. Freddy is an African-American volunteer of the French army looking for vengeance against the Germans. And finally there's Anna, a Belgian nurse working to save lives on both sides of the conflict while searching for a missing father. Their stories occur and intersect amidst the backdrop of major events during the war, including the Miracle of the Marne, the bombardment of Reims, the introduction of gas weapons at Ypres, the Somme offensive, and the capture of Vimy Ridge. The game largely glosses over the wider political issues at stake in the war in order to focus on the struggles of ordinary people during the conflict. This focus gives the player a more personal and emotional connection with a war that is so often considered from a textbook. Valiant Hearts encourages these connections through a set of collectible in-game items, each of which comes with an historical explanation. While most of these items are often directly related to combat, a significant number have no military purpose, and serve simply to help the player consider the wider context of life outside the war itself. In addition, players interested in the political background of the war will find short entries in the game's menu, which are drawn from the historical work of the Centenary Partnership and the French documentary series Apocalypse World War I. These historical touches help Valiant Hearts succeed in portraying the broad strokes of the war in a compelling way. Players are left with a clear sense of the overall course of the war, which began with enthusiasm, bright uniforms, and movement, but was replaced by despair, attrition, and stalemate. Valiant Hearts also does a good job of reminding players how low-tech the First World War remained in many respects. Although the war featured several new weapons including submarines, airplanes, and machine guns, armies still relied on implements of ancient warfare, including bayonets, horses, and dogs. The characters in the game rely heavily on their dog companion to help save comrades and to solve the game's puzzles. Good dog. Yet for as much as the game gets right historically, there remains some points of concern. Valiant Hearts often portrays the war in a cartoonish way, particularly during several chase sequences set to fast-paced classical music. In addition, the game's lovable characters are rarely engaged directly in killing enemies. Confrontation often ends with opponents being knocked out by a shovel or a spoon, or managing to run away before an explosion goes off. This non-violent approach certainly helps players empathize with the game's cast of characters, but it also betrays the reality of the conflict in question. Few people on the Western Front had the luxury or even the desire to take a non-violent approach to the Great War. Valiant Hearts also provides a very traditional narrative of the Great War. The focus of the game is entirely on the Western Front, with only token references to the war in Eastern Europe or elsewhere. Although the player encounters allies from the British Commonwealth, including soldiers from India and Canada, no mention is made of the war in Africa, Asia, or the Middle East. Speaking as a history professor, one of the most difficult things to convey about the First World War to students is the war's global nature. Popular memory tends to focus on the Western Front because of the striking visuals of trench warfare, as well as the literature that emerged from this field of force. But this focus can obscure other areas of conflict. The war brought about incredible changes for Russia, Eastern Europe, Africa, and perhaps most of all, the Middle East. Almost all of the current issues bedeviling the Middle East, including Israel, Palestine, ISIS, and Iraq, can be traced back to the Great War. Valiant Hearts' narrative also provides a very Franco-centric version of the war. German soldiers and officers in the game are portrayed as vicious, loud drunkards with monstrous beards and sharp teeth. Furthermore, while the game includes copious references to British imperial possessions, there's little to no reference to French imperialism or colonies. French colonial soldiers from Africa make a brief appearance during the game, but unlike other colonial troops, they receive no special mention by the game's narrator. Over 140,000 of these soldiers saw service during the war, with over 30,000 of them losing their lives. Many of these soldiers were recruited by violence, or by the threat of violence to their families if they did not cooperate. Even with these points of criticism, however, the game contains much to recommend it. The fact that I even have a First World War game that is good enough to be criticized is amazing to me. Despite its narrative shortfalls, then, Valiant Hearts does a commendable job of conveying the brutality and tragedy of the First World War. It is a game that offers the player fun, but also encourages remembrance and reflection. As an historian, you can't ask for much more.